Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel Cloud Tech Experts. This channel is dedicated to all my friends and colleagues who want to learn new concepts of any public cloud platform. To talk about myself, I am Shubhadeep Ganguly. I have around 13 years of overall work experience in the IT industry, and I am a cloud architect and Kubernetes expert. I will be the speaker for today's session. So let's move ahead and learn something new. Happy learning to you all. Hi there. Welcome you all to today's session where I'll talk about a very important concept of a new AWS managed service, which is called AWS Network Firewall. We will deep dive to the concepts of AWS Network Firewall, and we will see with the help of AWS Network Firewall how we will protect our virtual private cloud, that is VPC, against any malicious threats or any malicious calls. So we'll go to the deeper dive to the concepts of network firewall today. So let's begin. So AWS Network Firewall is a new managed security service of AWS, which was introduced in the end of year 2020. And with this help of this security service, we can enable network protections for the customers. It makes it easier to enable network protection across all their AWS workloads for AWS customers. Now, with the help of this, customer can enable network firewall in their desired Amazon Virtual Private Cloud environments with just a few clicks in the AWS console, and the service automatically scales with the network traffic to provide high availability protections without the need to set up and maintain the underlying infrastructure. So that's a specialty of this security service. Now, this AWS Network Firewall's flexible rule engine lets you define firewall rules that gives you fine-grained access and control over blocking outbound server message block requests, that is SMB, to prevent the spread of this malicious activity. Now see what is SMB in a very brief manner. So SMB is kind of a server message block protocol, that is a client server communication protocol used for sharing access to files and printers, serial ports, or any other resources on the network. It can also carry transaction protocols for inter-process communication. Now, this SMB protocol is most common method used for network communications. So in this model, client send an SMB request and the server receives the request, and it replies by sending an SMB response back to the client, establishing the communication channel necessary for a two-way communication. So this is how SMB protocol works in an inter-process communication. Now next, AWS Network Firewall's intrusion prevention system, that is IPS, provides active traffic flow inspection so that you can identify and block vulnerability exploits using different kind of detections. One of them is signature-based detections, and there are other kind of detections as well. Now, I am planning to create a separate video explaining the concept of intrusion prevention system, that is IPS. So for now, just understand IPS works in two modes. One is passive monitoring, where it does not block any traffic, but if malicious traffic is detected, it sends an out-of-band response for TCP reset. This is one mode of IPS. The next one and another one is active monitoring, or also it is called inline monitoring, where you have more control on this traffic flow. And in this kind of monitoring, IPS immediately blocks and drop the traffic in case of any malicious traffic is identified by this IPS. So that's all about the high level overview, how AWS Network Firewall works and what are the components and what are the features, the main features of the network firewall provided by AWS. Let's move ahead to the next slide. So now let's revisit and understand some of the important concepts of AWS, which are directly related to AWS Network Firewall, which is a managed security service of AWS. Now let's understand the key concepts now for network firewall. The first one is virtual private cloud. Now a virtual private cloud network, that is a virtual network that is dedicated and isolated for your AWS account. Now VPC will always contain a CIDR range. So the CIDR range can vary. So one of the most common CIDR range is 10.0.0.0/16. So that's about the virtual private cloud. The next one is internet gateway. So what is internet gateway? This is kind of a gateway that you attach to a VPC, that is virtual private cloud, to enable communication between your resources in your VPC and the internet. The next one is subnet. So subnet is a range of IP addresses in your VPC, and network firewall creates firewall endpoints in subnet inside your VPC to filter network traffic. In a VPC architecture that uses network firewall, the firewall sits between your protected subnets and location outside of your VPC. So generally, there are two kinds of subnets available. That is, one is public and another is private. So the CIDR range will vary for a public and a private subnet, which is displayed here. The next concept is about firewall subnet. So this is again a feature which is related to network firewall. Now, a subnet that you have designated for exclusive use by your network firewall for a firewall endpoint, that is called a firewall subnet. So which is used at a firewall endpoint, and it can filter traffic coming into or going out of the subnet it resides. So don't use this firewall subnet for anything other than that network firewall. So that is called the feature of firewall subnet. The next is the route table. Now, route table is a set of rules called routes that are used to determine where network traffic is directed. You modify your VPC route table in Amazon VPC to direct traffic through your firewalls for filtering. The next concept is about network firewall. So this is again an AWS resource that provides traffic filtering logic for the subnets in your VPC. This is also one of the core components of AWS network firewall. Next is network firewall policy. As the name determines, this is kind of a policy and an AWS resource definitely that defines the rules, that is policy and other settings for a firewall to use to filter incoming and outgoing traffic in a VPC. The next one is network firewall rule group. Now, this is again an AWS resource that defines a set of rules to match against VPC traffic and the actions to be taken when this AWS network firewall finds any kind of match. That's called and that's defined in the rule group. The next two concepts are very similar and dependent on each other. One is the stateless rule and another is the stateful rules. So let's see what is stateless rules. We are having again a different slide explaining the concept of stateless and stateful rules. So as of now, just understand the stateless rules are a criteria for inspecting a single network traffic packet without the context of other packets in the traffic flow, the direction of flow, or any other information that's not provided by the packet itself. And the last one is stateful rules. Now, this is again a criteria for inspecting network traffic packets in the context of their traffic flow. So these are the very important concept of AWS network firewall, and whenever you work with network firewall, you have to understand this concept in a very detailed manner. Now let's see how AWS network firewall exactly works inside your VPC in the next slide. Now, how does it work? Now let's understand in a brief manner how this network firewall actually works. Now I'll show you architecture. Now this control for architecture diagram is provided by AWS by explaining the end-to-end process of a network firewall. Now AWS network firewall works together with AWS firewall manager, as you see here. So you can build policies based on AWS network firewall rules, and then centrally apply these policies across your VPC and accounts. Now let's understand the architecture. To implement AWS network firewall, at the very first step, you need to create rule groups. As I already mentioned in my previous slide, what are the rule groups? Now, rule groups are reusable collections of network filtering rules that you use to configure firewall behavior. Now, in this step, you create a stateless rule group and a stateful rule group. Now, in the next step, you need to create a firewall policy. I already mentioned what is firewall policy. Now, with this firewall policy, you use rule groups and other settings to define the traffic filtering behavior for a firewall. And in this procedure, you also will create a policy using the rule groups that you created in the previous step. Now, after the previous step is done, after you create a policy, then you create a firewall. Now, firewalls associate the traffic filtering behavior of a firewall policy with the VPC where you want to filter the traffic. In this diagram, this is the VPC where you actually want to filter the traffic. You block and filter the traffic, you create a policy, you monitor. So here comes the firewall and it comes into picture. And this traffic filtering behavior is managed by this firewall. And you will create a firewall using the firewall policy that you created in the previous step. And last but not the least, at the very last step, you will update your Amazon VPC route tables. So every VPC will consist of a route table. And after we create the firewall, you insert this firewall endpoints into your Amazon Virtual Cloud Network traffic flow in between in your internet gateway and your customer subnet. Sorry. So this is where you will apply these route tables rules, which will actually manage the traffic flow between your VPC and your customer subnet, where the customer subnets will be outside of your VPC. And you create routing for the firewall endpoint so that it follows the traffic between the internet gateway and your subnet. So this is how the AWS firewall actually works inside your virtual private cloud, and it controls the traffic flow within, from, and to your VPC. Let's move ahead to the next slide and see why AWS network firewall. There are many kinds of firewalls that they are firewall managers, but then why AWS network firewall? There are some unique features which is associated with this network firewall. Now let's revisit them. Now with this network firewall, you can inspect VPC to VPC traffic. Now AWS network firewall inspects and helps control VPC to VPC traffic to logically separate network hosting, sensitive applications, or line of business workloads. With stateful visibility at the network and application layers, AWS network firewall can provide fine-grained network security controls for interconnected VPCs. That's why it is very important. The next is filter outbound traffic. So what happens? AWS network firewall provides an URL or domain name, IP address, and content-based outbound traffic filtering to stop possible data loss. Now, AWS network firewall supports thousands of rules that can filter out network traffic destined for known bad IP address or whatever known as bad domain names. So this is how it filters this kind of bad traffics, and that's why it is very important to filter this kind of traffics. The next one is filter internet traffic. That also is done by network firewall. So with this feature, AWS network firewall helps prevent intrusion by inspecting all inbound internet traffic using features such as access control list, then stateful inspection, protocol detection, and intrusion prevention, which I mentioned in my very first slide, that is the IPS. So this is also getting done using network firewall. And the last very important features of AWS network firewall is it can secure AWS Direct Connect and VPN traffic. Now, AWS network firewall secures AWS Direct Connect and VPN traffic from client devices and your on-premises environment supported by AWS Transit Gateway. And AWS network firewall can restrict this traffic to ensure that only least privileged access is granted to your VPC resources. So this is how AWS Network Firewall works, and this is the important features for which customers are actually required to use this network firewall to secure and protect their VPC. So in the next slide, we will study what is stateful and stateless firewall and how it is related to our AWS Network Firewall. Now let's move on to the next slide and see and understand the concept. Now stateful and stateless firewall, how they're different, right? So stateful firewall, that is the first one. It's a kind of firewall. You can see in this particular picture, that's a diagram of a stateful firewall, how does it work. Now, stateful firewall is kind of a firewall that monitors the full state of active network connections. This means that the stateful firewall are consistently or constantly analyzing the complete context of the traffic and data packets, seeking entry to a network rather than discrete traffic and data packets in isolation. So it monitors the entire traffic, the complete network traffic it monitors, which is completely possible using stateful firewall. Now, stateful firewall can also filter packets based on the full context of the given network connection, and also on the given network connection, it actually filters the entire traffic. And also, once a certain kind of traffic is been approved by the stateful firewall, what happens? It is now added to a state table, and then it can travel more freely into the protected network. So that's the concept of a state table in context of a stateful firewall. This is also called as a packet filter firewall, which I explained based on the concept of stateful firewall. With the help of this stateful firewall, you can actually filter your packets because it sees the contents of the packet and then it filters the data and the traffic. So this is about stateful firewall. Now we'll revisit what is stateless firewall. Now, stateless firewalls, as you can see, these are actually designed to protect network based on a very few static information such as source and destination. That's why it is stateless. And with this particular example, now stateless firewalls actually do not take as much into account as stateful firewalls. As you can understand, this is stateless firewall, but they are generally considered to be less rigorous. For example, where we can use stateless firewall, we can consider it could be useful when it comes to blocking large attacks happening beyond the individual packet level. So in this situation, it is kind of use case where stateful firewall will be useful where it comes of blocking a larger amount of attack. So this is about stateful and stateless firewall in a brief manner. And this is also a kind of difference which is considered where actually working with stateless firewall and stateful firewall. So stateful firewalls are having a concept of state table where it is added, and the other one is also similar like network access control list. Now let's go ahead to the next slide. So now we'll understand, we have understood the concept of stateful and stateless firewall. Now we'll just understand whether AWS Network Firewall is a stateful or stateless service. Now, AWS Network Firewall uses both stateful and stateless rule engine to inspect packets. The engines inspect packets according to the rules that you provide in your firewall policy. Now you can use a firewall on a per availability zone basis in your VPC, and for each availability zone, you choose a subnet to host the firewall endpoint that filters your traffic. The firewall endpoint in an availability zone can protect all the subnets inside the zone except for the one where it is located. Now let's see what are the central components of AWS Network Firewall. Now AWS Network Firewall runs stateless and stateful traffic inspection rule engines, and these are the concept of or these are the components mainly of a network firewall. First one is rule group. Now, rule group holds the reusable connections of criteria for inspecting traffic, for handling packets and traffic flows that match the inspection criteria. And you can choose to drop or pass a packet or all the packets in a traffic flow based on this inspection criteria mentioned by the rule group. The next one is firewall policy, which defines a reusable set of stateless and stateful rule groups along with some policy level behavior settings. And this policy provides the network traffic filtering behavior of a or for a firewall. The next component is called as a firewall. Now this component connects the inspection rules in the firewall policy to the VPC that the rule protect. Each firewall records at least one firewall policy. And this firewall additionally defines settings like how do you log information about network traffic and the firewall's stateful traffic filtering. So you have to define at least one rule to define this kind of policies. So in the next slide, we will revisit how does this AWS network firewall stateless and stateful rule engines works. We'll see a diagram and we'll understand. Now you will see a diagram. Now this figure shows how the processing flow for packets coming through the firewall works. First, the stateless rule engine, which is defined here. First, the stateless rule engine inspect the packets against the configured stateless rule. Now, depending on the packet settings, the stateless inspection criteria and the firewall policy settings and the stateless engine might drop a packet or pass it through a destination or forward to a stateful rule engine. You can hear if it is successful, it forward to a stateful rule engine. Now, once it comes to a stateful rule engine, now the stateful rule engine inspect packets in the context of their traffic flow using some pre-configured stateful rules, which is configured inside this. Now, the stateful rule engine actually works on either dropping our packets or passes to the destination, and it activities sends flow and alert clouds to the firewall's log system if login is configured. And the stateful rule engine sends alerts for dropped packet and optionally send them for passed packet, as it is mentioned here. So if it is getting a pass packet, then it actually send them an alert and also for the dropped packet. So this is how the stateless and stateful rule engines are interconnected and work together to protect your VPC using this firewall rule engine. We will go to a deep dive of the stateful and stateless rule engine in the next slide, and we'll see what are the features of these stateful and stateless rule engines. Now, first is the stateless. So the first one is it inspects each packet in isolation without regard to the factors such as direction of traffic or whether the packet is a part of existing or approved connection. As it is stateless, so each packet it has to like inspect in isolation. It also prioritizes the speed of evolution. It takes rule with standard 5-tuple connection criteria. And this engine processes your rules in the order that you prioritize them and stop processing when it finds a match. So this is all about stateless rule engines, some important features. And next one is the previous one is for the stateless rule engines, and now we'll study about the stateful rule engines. So we'll also see what are the important features of a stateful rule engine. The first one is with this, you can inspect packets in the context of their traffic flow, and it allows you to use more complex rules. It also, with this kind of rule engine, it also allows you to log network traffic and to log network firewall alerts on the traffic. Now, stateful rule consider traffic direction or redirection, and the stateful rule engine might delay packet delivery in order to group packets for inspection. That is also one of the main features of this stateful rule. Now, by default, so there's a default behavior. By default, this rule engine processes rules in the order of their action settings with pass rule process first and then drop and then alert. So that's the flow. And this engine stops processing when it finds a match. And the last one is this stateful engine takes rules that are compatible with a very known intrusion prevention system, that is Suricata, which is also an open source IPS. So that is, so stateful rule engines are actually compatible with Suricata, which is an open source IPS system. So that's all about the concept of stateful and stateless rule engine of AWS Network Firewall. Now we'll see what are the differences between to very important resources of AWS, that is security group and network firewall, and I will see what are the differences. Now the difference is, by default, stateful root engine allows traffic to pass, but the security group by default is actually denies the traffic. That's the main difference between security group and network firewall features. Very important points to remember, like, is there any similarities between any other AWS security look, like security resources like access control list or security group? So yes, there are some similarities which we'll visit now. Now, network firewall stateless rules are similar in behavior and use with Amazon VPC's network access control list, like ACLs, and network firewall stateful rules are similar in behavior and used to Amazon VPC security groups. Now, to recap, I will just explain in a brief manner what is ACL and what is security group. Now, a network access control is an optional layer of security for your VPC that acts as a firewall for controlling traffic in and out of one or more subnets. And you might set up network ACLs with the rules similar to your security groups, but this is a specific feature with an additional layer of security. And the next one is the security group, or also called Amazon EC2 security groups, which is actually a virtual firewall, and it controls incoming and outgoing traffic, and it is having some inbound rules which controls the incoming traffic to your instance, and it is also having kind of outbound rules which controls the outgoing traffic from your instance. So this is these are some important features which are closely related to network firewall, and there are some differences and also similar kind of similarities are there between these security features with network firewall. So with this, we are done with today's slide and today's session. So I thank you all for watching today's session. There are some important references I'll just share with you. You can go through to learn more onto the AWS network firewall. I hope you have enjoyed today's session, and I'll see you all in the next session. Thank you.